Hi, I'm Anthony Prestia. I'm a VP here at TerraTrue, and today I'm going to walk you through a demo of our platform. If you're not familiar with TerraTrue, we are a SaaS tool used by enterprise customers to drive their core trust functions. So think about things like privacy by design, security by design, third-party risk management, AI governance and ethics, trust and safety, and other functions. TerraTrue's founding team is built by a number of professionals that have decades of experience building and maintaining privacy and security programs at Google, Snap, and other companies. And we try to bring all of that experience into everything we build. So in addition to a technically capable platform, today you'll see a platform designed to address the needs of folks that have done this work at scale. So we're going to talk about things like driving adoption with business stakeholders. We're going to look at the use of AI and automations to make it much faster and easier to do your work, eliminate some of the rote work and documentation that can plague your programs and operate at unprecedented scale. We're also going to look at just ease of use and metrics that make the tool useful for a variety of different stakeholders. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the tool itself. What you're seeing right now is what we call the Launchpad. The Launchpad is designed to be an easy-to-use dashboard that lets your organization know the current status of any reviews happening within it. In this case, you can see a number of line items here with 3 separate review teams set up for privacy, security, and vendor risk. This can vary from organization to organization, and we'll talk about that in the in-depth demo a bit later, but we have some customers that may just have one team using TerraTrue for third-party risk management, whereas we have others that are using it for a dozen different review functions that all collaborate right here in a single unified platform. Each line item you see here on the Launchpad is something we call a launch. A launch is really just anything that needs some form of review. So that might be a new product or feature. It might be a change to an existing product. It could be a vendor review, or perhaps you want to enable some AI features in an internal tool. Anything that could need a review can end up in TerraTrue as a launch. We've known from past experience that it doesn't matter how good your people are or how great your process is. If people do an end run around it and don't engage with you, then it's not worth much at all. So we want to make it very easy for launches to end up in TerraTrue and not necessarily rely on PMs and engineers and others to have to raise their hand to let you know that they're building something that may require your input. To that end, there are a lot of different ways for a launch to end up in TerraTrue. We'll show these a bit later in the in-depth demo, but you can certainly click the Create Launch button within the tool, go through a customized workflow that will help initiate the launch, or we've really focused on deep integrations with tools that other teams are already using. So think about things like Jira and Slack and Ironclad, where folks are already working day to day and doing things that may signal that, hey, they need some review. So a good example might be a new product or feature is added to a roadmap in Jira, and if it meets certain criteria, it can be pulled into TerraTrue automatically. We'll see that in a little bit. Let's take a look at what a launch itself can look like. We'll go ahead and open one here. You can see it's divided into 2 main columns. The central column is where most of the work is going to happen. You can see we have a title, a description of what's under review, and then these sections where most of the work will take place. This intake section encompasses things like screeners to identify, hey, what reviews are needed here? For example, do we want to pull the privacy team in, the vendor team in, the security team in? And then if a review is required, diving in to figure out what sort of information we need to complete those reviews. So whose data are we collecting? What regions is this launching in? Will it involve AI? Things like that. Once we have that information, TerraTrue will automatically trigger reviews for you. So that might involve a privacy review to ensure compliance with the GDPR or any number of state laws. It might involve an AI risk assessment to check your compliance with the EU AI Act. It could involve these third-party invitations. So perhaps you want to send a questionnaire out to a potential vendor and have them answer questions around infrastructure security, app security, those sorts of things. We'll go into detail about how to build these and how to send them a bit later, but this is the general structure. You can see in here the responses to different reviews. You can do inline commenting back and forth with an external party, all of that. The last section in the main area here is the commenting section. This is where you can mention different stakeholders within your organization, provide comments, feedback, but you can also have this integrated with Slack. So you as a reviewer can continue to do your work within TerraTrue, but business stakeholders can respond in Slack or other tools they're using. So again, they're adopting your program and not having to figure out how to use a new tool. In the right-hand column here, we can see a lot of information about the launch itself. So for example, we can see the different reviews, which ones are needed in their current status, who the review is assigned to, and if you are a reviewer yourself, you can set your status here. We can see information about who created the launch, where it came from, and in this case, we can actually see it came from Jira, which will show this a bit more depth later, but you can quickly see where we're able to pull in titles and descriptions and other information from that tool. We can see attachments and links related to the launch. So this might be internal product specs, or in the case of a vendor review like this launch, maybe it's a SOC 2 report from that vendor or links to their privacy policy. You'll notice these stars next to attachments. These are what we call AI insights. So if I click this, you're going to quickly see a summary of what's in this document. So for example, with the SOC 2, we can see the reporting period, the scope of the report, and whether any exceptions were identified. Key information you need to make your assessment as a privacy or security professional. Additionally, if a DPA ends up on there, you can take a look and quickly see what sort of data this vendor has access to. Does it involve sensitive data? Who are their sub-processors and other information relevant to your review? Finally, in this section, as you go through, you complete your different reviews, you can set your status, and then you can say, you know what, this review is complete, or I'm rejecting it, or perhaps you want to conditionally improve it and add tasks to the launch. Tasks are a simple way to track additional work you would like to have done. So for example, if you identify a risk with a particular vendor and there's some sort of safeguard you want implemented or restriction on that vendor, you can add that here, assign that task to someone with a priority level, track it, and even align it with perhaps a risk registry you keep internally that you can then track over time. That's a general look at what an individual review can look like, and we'll do one of those end-to-end and in more depth a bit later, but let's talk about how TerraTrue can help you manage your program overall. We'll do that first by clicking over here into the third parties dashboard. From here, you can see a quick overview of everything happening in your third-party risk management program. We can see the number of launches in flight. We can see either total number of vendors, how many are active, how many prospective, the ones you've archived or rejected. We can click in to get a bit more of a deep dive. So if we look at prospective vendors, we can see how we've so far evaluated risk and what types of vendors they are. If I would then want to take a look at the analytics and measurement vendors that are currently under review, I can see that there are 3 here. And in fact, there's Gong, which we were just looking at this assessment. If I click into Gong, we can see a whole bunch of rich information about this vendor. So for example, this reassessment section here allows you to schedule and check upcoming assessments for this vendor. We can see our key contacts at the vendor. We can then click links and attachment and see all the links and attachments associated with that vendor, along with any AI insights that were derived. So these are available not just in the one-off review, but at an overall surface level for each vendor. We can see invitations, which would be any of those questionnaires you have sent out to the individual vendor, and we can also see every launch related to this vendor. The right column here is going to be sort of rich metadata about the third party. So this could include their contact information, key business stakeholders within your organization, the risk levels you've assigned, as well as any arbitrary attributes you would like to track. So do they have a SOC 2 certification? What locations are they in? Or really anything you can imagine, including just unstructured notes about the vendor. Quickly in this section, we can also see the invitation. So here's every assessment we've sent out to a third party, along with any open comments, the current status of the review, the date it was sent. And this is all filterable, so you can kind of manage those on a one-off. The assessment library is going to show you each of the assessments you have available to send out to vendors and third parties. These are going to be easily customizable, and we'll look at how this is done in a little bit, but this is something where you will not require sort of internal engineering resources to edit them. They're rich questions, there's branching logic, and there's a lot of automation built into them as well. From here, we can also generate reports based on those assessments. So let's say we've sent out this infrastructure security questionnaire to a number of vendors. We can come in here and see how they were answered in aggregate by all of our vendors. We can get a table view that shows each vendor and their individual responses alongside it. And then we can also narrow down and filter this to say, hey, for example, let's look at any vendors that are not implementing firewalls across their network, and then we can take that table view and see it's just these 2 vendors that we work with, or really streamline ways to address specific risks you identify and reevaluate your vendors on a one-off basis. In addition to this vendor view, we have broad metrics about how your programs function overall. So for example, this dashboard here, you can add widgets that pull information from throughout the product and let you know what are the volume of reviews coming in? How does it take to transition from one step to the next? Things like that will help you plan for headcount and how you need to build out your program. Additionally, you can get rich views into things like the data you're processing or how you're using it. So in this case, we can hop in here and say, look, here's all the data our organization uses. Maybe do a deep dive into email address and say, hey, look, here's the risk we've assessed related to email. Here's where the data comes from. Here are the retention periods we've approved. And here's every launch that involves this piece of data. We have a data cataloging product that we'll talk a little bit about later on, but this will plug into your systems, automatically classify data, and let you know where email lives. So if you're coming in here and looking at your assessments, you can then also quickly dive in and take a look to see where this information lives within your systems and what other data it's associated. All right, so let's hop in and do a deep dive into TerraTrue. We're going to return here to the Launchpad very quickly and spend a bit more time talking about how this can be used. So as I mentioned before, this is a tool that's useful not only to your reviewers, but potentially other stakeholders within your organization. So we have some rich customization options, including the ability to add and remove columns that may be relevant to you. So things like risk levels and SLAs and regions and things like that, even particular review teams that are of interest to you. You can also add some filters. So for example, maybe I'm only concerned about certain teams. I can filter it to only show me those reviews that are related to, marketing, revenue, and growth, because perhaps those are the teams I review. And then I'll have a narrowed down view. I can save this as my teams, and it'll now live here in the left-hand sidebar so I can revisit it whenever I'm doing my work. I can also use shareable links here to give this view to another stakeholder, or even export it as a CSV if I'm ever responding to an audit or anything like that. For a number of our customers, this is also useful to business stakeholders. So a common use case would be, say, a product manager may come in and say, hey, you know what, show me all of the product domains that are relevant to me, and then filter it by what's being released over the next quarter. In this way, they have a quick dashboard view to let them see what initiatives are underway and are there any blockers right now, or has even work begun on assessing this product, feature, or process for privacy and security concerns. Next, I want to dive into a bit more detail about how launches end up in TerraTrue. I briefly mentioned before that you can do them manually through the tool, or we can plug into third-party integrations. So let's take a look at that very quickly. The first and simplest way, obviously within TerraTrue, is to hit this Create Launch button and manually trigger one. You'll also notice this is a standardized URL, and we do have some customers take this and plug it into things like product specs or internal wikis that make it very easy for different stakeholders to find this process and initiate a review through this form. The form itself is highly customizable. We have some defaults out of the box for different review types or business types, but you can really customize it to exactly how your organization works. In this case, you can see we've set it up to involve things like reviews for specific third parties. You could set up paths for different product reviews, AI reviews, trust and safety reviews, whatever it may be. We can add in a title here. Maybe we'll onboard a new analytics vendor. We can add in descriptions. We can add in release dates, all of that sort of thing. From here, all these fields again are customizable, where you can say, hey, we want to have components or products, link labels here like geographies, teams, things like that. We can also identify this specific third party we're about to review. So in this case, I can type in a search, see if they're in there. If they are, great. If not, I can hit add third party and add a new one here right in line. If we select one that's already in the system, we'll see some relevant information pop up, like who the main contacts are for this vendor. We can also ask at this point for things like attachments and links, information that'll be helpful to your review. So if you're doing a product review, that might involve a link out to a product spec. If it's a vendor, maybe you want to attach things like that DPA or like a SOC 2 agreement right here, or maybe even link out to something like a privacy policy. So it's very easy to find this information for the reviewer. Not only can you customize this ahead of time, but it will react to changes in line. So for example, if I say this is a review related to something in our company's ad platform, I can have specific questions related to that ad platform. Or if it potentially involves AI, maybe I have some questions to determine which AI regulations are in scope. So in this case, we could say, hey, does it involve the use of an AI system? Yes. If so, will it be used for any of these specific purposes? If no, will it be rolled out in the EU? If yes, then this is going to trigger EU AI Act obligations, and you can have downstream workflows to address those risks, which we'll see momentarily. I'll go ahead and hit create, and that's going to make the launch in the background. But while that happens, why don't I go ahead and open up Jira? From within Jira here, I can go ahead and let's pretend this is just my organization's standard product board where we track our product roadmap and all the related engineering work. I can create an issue here. We'll just call it new product to keep it simple. I can add in a quick description and then fill out the basic information you would expect to see in a Jira issue. When do we want to go live with this, for example? But we can also have custom fields that are relevant for our review team. So things like, will this change how we collect user share personal data? Will it involve user generated content? Do you have any specific security or privacy concerns you'd like help with? Again, this is something you can customize for the specific needs of your organization. When I hit create, we're going to see, as you would expect, it creates a Jira issue, but alongside that, when we look at it, there's automatically a link to a TerraTrue launch. So if I click that link, we can see the launch has been created here in TerraTrue. We can see it pulled in the title and the description. We can see the launch creator is myself from Jira. We can see a link back to the Jira integration itself. Based on how those questions were answered, it also marked some of the reviews as not needed and assigned them to specific reviewers. And I can come in here and mark the last review as not needed if I'd like. Now, if I go back to that Jira ticket, I can click here, you'll see it loads, and instantly we've provided feedback back to the engineer or business stakeholder that created the Jira issue that lets them know, hey, no further action is necessary, this review has been completed, and we can even add labels to it, letting them know, hey, the TerraTrue review is now done. This is also a bidirectional sync that keeps updated in real time. So for example, if I say updated here in that Jira description and we go back to the TerraTrue launch, we can see that updated in real time. So quick demo of how an integration can work. We see customers use this in all sorts of different tools like contract management systems like Ironclad. So if somebody wants to onboard a vendor and it goes to the commercial team in Ironclad, that can be the kickoff point for review. You could have launches created via Slack messages. So maybe you have marketing teams or others that want to do something that impacts privacy or security, but maybe aren't using typical developer tools. So lots of options available there, as well as open APIs to plug into your own in-house tools. Let's go ahead and go back to that original launch we created manually within TerraTrue. We can see it right here. And let's explore this in a bit more detail. So we previously talked about the metadata here on the right. That all still exists. And you can see with those new attachments I've added, it's already created these AI insights. So for that SOC 2 report, we can see the key information and whether there were any exceptions. And for that data processing agreement, we can see things like who their sub-processors are, what data is in scope for this review, those sorts of things. We can also see, based on this information, that we've automatically assigned some reviewers and that they're all required in this case. And we can see it's added on a few reviews out of the gate, saying this likely is going to need a privacy review and some specific AI reviews. Let's go ahead and actually take a look at what one of those assessments might look like. So we'll do this EU AI Act risk assessment. These are custom to each organization. We have these templates. For example, this one out of the box, it applies to EU AI Act. We have the GDPR, we have state privacy laws, we have a number of security templates as well, but I'll go into the form builder in a little bit and you can see how you can engineer your own within the platform, import existing work you already have, or build from some templates that we offer. From here, we can answer some basic questions, and this will help us identify what type of risks are in scope here and what remedies we may need to address. So I'm going to do this very quickly because no one wants to watch a full sort of AI assessment on this demo, but hopefully this gives you a useful outline for what's happening. So in this case, I can answer these questions, I can hit next, and then the tool automatically provides some recommendations saying, hey, based on how you answered this, you're a deployer of a high-risk AI system. Here are some compliance requirements you have under the law. Here's what you have to do to address transparency and those sorts of things. I can take these recommendations, I can create those tasks to track that work. So perhaps I want to add a task on here that says, look, if we're going to deploy this tool, we need to provide notice to end users that they're interacting with Gen AI, things like that, and I can conditionally approve it based on those tasks being completed. Those tasks can be added manually or they can be done automatically, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. I can also at this point create those invitations that I mentioned. So in this case, we are looking at a vendor. So if I hit create invitation, it's going to automatically pull in the third party that's under review, link it to this launch, and then I can select from my library of assessments what I would like them to fill out. I can hit next, choose from the contacts we have associated with this vendor, put a custom message in there and send it. What you'll then see is we now have these assessments linked to this launch summary. You can see the current status of them. You can view responses if you'd like, and you can also do some inline commenting back and forth with the vendor. This is the spot, again, where you can go through, you can collaborate using comments, tasks, you can mark your status as complete, and when it's done, you will send notices back to that stakeholder, either in the third-party tool or in TerraTrue itself, letting them know that their review has been approved or not. There are two main paths for customizing TerraTrue. So the first is something we call taxonomies. One key thing we wanted to do when we built this platform is align around structured data. I think one of the weaknesses we saw in a lot of other tools, as well as manual processes, were that when you're doing things in that way, you're often doing a lot of work and then it lives on a Google Drive or a Box Drive or something like that for a long time. It doesn't get reused. No one knows what to do with the information. And instead, we wanted to make useful structured data so we could have metrics downstream, but we could also leverage that information to pre-fill assessments going forward. A good example of that would even be here, where rather than going ahead and doing this workflow by default, I can actually import past responses. TerraTrue can rank previous reviews based on how similar they look to these, import those answers, and then I'm off to the races and I don't have to start from scratch. We'll do this throughout the tool. So for example, if you're doing data protection impact assessments, we'll pull in ones that look similar and things like that. So let's look at the taxonomies themselves. They live over here in the settings. You can see some out of the box. Let's look at data types. First, there's a large taxonomy of common data types used by different organizations. We have created this so you have some out of the box, so you can get up and running on day one without much configuration, but this is also something you can customize, or we can nuke ours and import yours if you already have an existing taxonomy from a third-party tool or a spreadsheet or anything like that. You can edit these individually or in bulk, add things like risk levels to them, have them automatically trigger different types of assessments, categorize them, things like that. And you can do this for everything from retention periods to different regions that you may operate in and associate those regions with different modules. So things like privacy modules, security assessments, those sorts of things, or even the ways you process data and associate that with risk. This is useful in a few ways. So for example, these data types, not only when you're building out workflows for third parties or internal stakeholders to fill out, you can add a question that draws from these taxonomies and gives them specific answers to add to good data quality when you're reviewing something. But these are also the same taxonomies we would use for something like our data cataloging product. So when you're doing reviews of products and features, you're talking about data in the same way that the tool that's automatically scanning your systems is classifying that data. So you have a nice bridge from the work you do day to day to that technical verification in your systems. The next main way to customize TerraTrue are the workflows themselves. So let's go ahead and look in the workflow library. You can see it's divided into several sections. We have those intake workflows, and these are the ones that would be used to determine, is a review even required in this case, or what additional information do we need to perform our assessment, to the assessments themselves, right? So perhaps it's an AI risk assessment or a DPIA or a security assessment. Those sorts of things all live here. They're all edited with the same interface, and let's take a look at that. So when I initially created that launch, if you recall, I said, hey, this is going to involve our ad platform project, and some special questions popped up. Those were built right here. Here you can see that you have pages at the top level, individual questions at the lower level, and you can go ahead and choose from a variety of question types, from checkboxes to radio buttons, text areas, those taxonomy question types we talked about, or alerts, which are a way to give folks real-time feedback to let them know, for example, maybe the decision they've made will have a longer SLA because it's going to have a greater risk, so you're going to need more time to review it, things like that. Each of these questions can involve risk scoring, so you can assign different values to different responses and then set thresholds for what might be low, medium, or high risk in an assessment. And then additionally, you can add context, so like informational eyes to help people understand how to answer a question, or display conditions to say only show this question when certain criteria are met. This is also where pre-population comes into play. So if you recall, when I created that launch from Jira, a lot of these questions were automatically filled out. I didn't have to make the user come into TerraTrue. The way that works is that TerraTrue can say, hey, look, you build out the questions that are useful across the board, no matter whether that launch is created in our tool or via a third party. And then what we'll do is pre-fill it with information from a third-party tool if it exists. So that way, if the launch is created in TerraTrue, folks can manually fill it out, but if it's coming in via Jira, it can be pre-filled with the information that's already available. What's really powerful and unique to TerraTrue is what we call custom actions, though. So custom actions live right here, and what you can do is say, hey, look, based on different criteria, we want certain actions to happen. And perhaps that says when these criteria are met, then we can mark a certain review as not needed or blocked or even complete. Perhaps you want to add on different assessments. So when certain things happen, maybe you want to automatically add on an AI risk assessment or do some sort of vendor review. You can create tasks in this way. So again, if certain criteria are met, you could automatically add on a task that identifies an item from your risk registry and asks an engineer or PM to take action on it. And you can integrate with third-party tools. So for example, you could raise an issue in Jira if based on certain responses, you want to assign a unit of work to an engineer. Very simple, very powerful, and we have a top-notch customer success team that works with our customers to design these workflows based on what we've seen successful with other customers. In addition to this, let's talk a little bit more about some of those downstream metrics. We'll go back into third parties very quickly to start. We went over this pretty quickly. The overview page, I think we did a decent summary of, but there's also the third party section here where you can dive in and get a look at all of your vendors and search for them. That way you can find relevant ones, take a look at what they're working on, and again, get that deep view about scheduling reassessments, third party contacts, things like that. Third-party settings are where you can edit things like the categories you attribute vendors to. You can add on those arbitrary attributes to say, here's information I care about. Like, let's add maybe a multiple choice field that tracks specific information or dates or text fields, so you can have a robust outline of information related to different vendors. You can see the different attributes related to invitations. So things like how long will an invitation last before it expires, those sorts of things. The invitations dashboard we touched upon. This is where you can, again, look at the different reviews you've sent out to individuals, view their responses, see inline comments and help them respond to them, things like that. We also have the assessment library. So this is just like the assessment library you have for your internal reviews. This involves the ones you would send out to third parties. You can go in here and add these individually, develop them with the create button, just like you did your other assessments, or we can actually import assessments from spreadsheets. So if you're currently doing this work now in a spreadsheet, let's pull those questions in, tweak it, add some automations, all of that. Or you can create them from templates. So for example, we have this minimum viable security product checklist. We have VSAQ templates, those sorts of things. So you can pull them in, use them as is, or customize them to your needs. Back over here in the broader reporting, we did a pretty deep dive, I think, into the dashboard here where you can build them to understand how your program's functioning. One thing we did not touch upon is the ability to actually sort of save these. So just like filters that you do on the Launchpad, you can create filters here as well and say, hey, you know what, show me these for certain product lines or different labels. You can save these over here on the left-hand side. Maybe this is a view I want to give to my board of directors, so I'll save it as a board of directors view, and it'll live over here in the sidebar, and I can actually generate a shareable link. So if you want to report the performance of your program to specific stakeholders within your organization, this is a simple way to do that. You can run complex queries against data in your organization. So for example, if you want to look at all of the data types that you have sold to a third party over the last year or something like that, you can run queries to find that, update privacy and security notices, things like that. We have automated ROPAs. So for any of you that also work in the privacy space, you may know that you need to keep these pretty laborious records called records of processing. They're typically 30+ column spreadsheets. They require hundreds of hours of work and bothering your business stakeholders by sending them manual surveys to fill out. But in TerraTrue, because we captured structured data with each review, we can fill these out for you automatically. You can group this information in different ways. You can filter them and say, hey, you know what, I'm only really worried about information related to our employees, and you can get that customized view, which you can then export, share with regulators, all of that sort of thing. We have a full assessment library, so you can see every assessment you've completed within the tool. You can filter them in different ways, export them as PDFs. And then finally, we do have a recommendations feature that will let you dive in, and for different modules, for example, like a privacy module, we have 19 new privacy laws here in the US. You can actually run that module against every review you've done in the past. So you'd get a notification in TerraTrue, for example, that Virginia has passed a privacy law. And do you want to compare the requirements of that law to every review you've done in the past? We'll do that in the background for you, and then we'll build out this dashboard that will let you know things like, hey, Virginia has these requirements around privacy assessments. Here are the specific requirements. And actually, here's a launch you did in the past that would require one of these assessments if you were to change this product or feature going forward. So it's sort of like an automated gap analysis. Lastly, in this section, we do have data catalog. I touched it very briefly, but the idea here is that you can take TerraTrue, plug it into a variety of systems, including those that you use for AI, like MLflow or SageMaker, and we can scan those instances, identify what data is in them, and you can kind of explore the content of it right here by kind of clicking into them, looking at the different data sets and seeing what's available. You can also do this from a data types view. So perhaps you want to come in here and say, hey, look, let's look at date of birth. I can click this. We can then view within our different systems, where do we store date of birth? What type of data is it associated with? And then perhaps even jump into where it's stored in Glue and things like that and find that information. Well, there are a number of products that do offer data classification. I think one thing that really sets us apart is this idea of launch triggers. So we are not just a tool for data classification like some, but we are the kind of automation for all of your review processes within an organization. So we want these functions to talk to one another. So one thing you can do is come in here and set up different triggers that will automate reviews within your platform. So for example, if you want to initiate a review whenever a sensitive piece of data like a social security number is found in a data source like Snowflake, you can set up that trigger. Our tool will scan that system, and whenever it identifies that sensitive data, it will create a launch in TerraTrue, notify the relevant stakeholders, and then you can say, hey, look, is this authorized? Should this have gone through a review process we missed? Or is this expected? And you've got this nice backstop in technical technical assurance that what you've approved is what's actually happening within your system. Hopefully that was a useful overview of the TerraTrue platform, and you've seen how it can be used to help streamline your privacy and security process. There are a number of features we couldn't get to today, like deep integrations, rich reporting, and ways to automate away assignments through Okta and things like that. But if you'd like to learn more, please reach out to us at our website, TerraTrueHQ.com, to schedule an in-depth demo or even a POC. Thanks.